So let's take a moment to actually drop in on ourselves. And often we can fine tune that experience by establishing yourself in a sitting posture that's, in some sense, embodies wakefulness and dignity, and certainly reminds you of why you signed up for this in the first place, whether you're here in this room in San Francisco or whether you're in your own space anywhere in the world. So just seeing if you can sit in a posture that embodies everything that is bringing you here, the deep motivation to connect with others, to connect with yourself. And as Soren was pointing out, I mean, there really is no other time in which to recognize the opportunity for connection, because we're only alive in this moment. And if we miss this one, then it doesn't bode well for the next one, because we get into the habit of zoning along on autopilot and taking lots of stuff for granted, including just the miracle of your own body sitting here breathing now. And so just dropping into silence, inside and in between and underneath my words. And just putting out the welcome mat for the entire universe of sensations in the body as you're sitting here. Contact of the legs with the seat of the chair, and perhaps with the back of the chair if you're leaning back. I encourage you not to lean back on those chairs, but to, in some sense, be more self-supporting, so that the spine elevates out of the pelvis and the head is carried on the neck and shoulders in such a way that it really is to some degree autonomous. And experiencing, grounding yourself in the actuality of the sensations associated with what we call breathing, where we're actually drinking in the air around the body and releasing it, and thereby sustaining our lives moment by moment. And we're not actually doing it. We do it in our sleep. So when we say, I'm breathing, there's a little bit of a problem with that statement, because we don't know who the I is that's claiming to be breathing, when it's obvious that if it were up to you to be breathing, given how, among other things, how distracted you are, you would have died a long time ago, because our capacity for attending is so unreliable and so underdeveloped. So in this moment, actually in awareness, even marveling, delighting in the fact that we are being breathed, so to speak. And we have this moment, wherever we are on the planet, in which to be fully at home in our body, and thus fully at home and fully awake, if you will, in the world, in the midst of all the sorrow, anguish, violence, hatred, terminal delusion and confusion, amplified by social media and insane levels of political machinations, cynical machinations. And we're bathing in that as much as we're bathing in the air in the room we're in. And awareness can hold it all with equanimity in this moment. So the gesture of mindfulness, of meditative awareness, is really not passive by any stretch of the imagination. Although from the outside, it looks like there's nothing much happening. Maybe you can feel that just in following my words and the silence underneath them into your own heart, that it's a little bit like tuning an instrument. So that when it's time to play, it plays with a certain kind of fidelity. In this case, to your true nature, what you most love, what you most care for, and what you know in the deepest of ways in your heart that go far beyond mere conceptual and cognitive knowing. And this is, in some sense, accessing a true superpower that all of us humans already have, don't need to acquire, but the access often gets overgrown with thorns and brambles. And I'm talking about awareness, pure awareness. And so when we drop in like this to the domain of being, whether you call it meditation or mindfulness or just sitting or, any of the languaging that's used to invite and describe meditative awareness, what we're really doing is reclaiming this superpower birthright of ours. And I'm using the word superpower by, inspired by Greta Thunberg, who uses that term to describe her own challenges with autism spectrum. And how evidently she makes use of what many people would consider a deficit to actually transcend all limitations with a clarity and ferocity that is truly selfless and right on target. And she would be the first to say she's no different from any of us in any fundamental way. So maybe by breathing in, we can actually inspire on the in-breath, the inspiration before the expiration, inspire ourselves to tap into what's deepest and best and most beautiful and most creative and most imaginative and most embodied in ourselves. And I'm guessing that your motivation to show up either digitally or in the room itself at this Wisdom 2.0 conference is a kind of signature of a certain kind of love that you have, or an intuition of a love that might be possible and embodied and enacted when we can, in fact, take up residency in our own awareness as the kind of default mode of the flourishing of our humanness in the only moment we ever have, which is called this one. So a lot of words, but the invitation here is to drop in to where the words are pointing in your own heart, in your own bones, in your own flesh. And become intimate and at home with stillness and silence. With what I often call the domain of being. Because when we can learn to take up residency in the domain of being and in the nature of our being as capable of inhabiting awareness in this way, then the kind of doing that comes out of these moments of being is an entirely different kind of doing. And it's just what the world, in its suffering, in its delusion, in its greed, in its hatred, is starving for. Absolutely starving for. No, even dying for. And we're witnessing it. Writ large and horrific in Ukraine, but also in so many other domains in our own worlds and in our own countries and in our own hearts even. Because we too, when you come right down to it, unless we train the mind in some way to become more transparent to these forces, are also subject to self-centeredness, to believing that we're special and othering others that don't look or talk or have the same values that we might have, which is itself a form of violence, aggression. And when we learn to let our doing come out of this domain of open-hearted heartfulness, mindfulness, awareness, it's an entirely different doing when it comes out of being in this way. And it's exactly what the world is starving for in this moment. So now in awareness, anchored in the envelope of the skin and the body, sitting here or standing or lying down or whatever posture you happen to be in. And befriending wakefulness, stillness, silence. And the heart's intrinsic spaciousness that we sometimes call compassion. A kind of impulse to connect with others, that especially who are suffering in a particular moment, which is where any kindness that actually ever emerges in our lives is coming from. If you become aware of those impulses, they're everywhere. So there's no improving on the human heart. You are not a self-centered and selfish person. But if you believe certain narratives that move through your mind, of course, then you may actually fall into those kinds of ruts, habits that are really habits of somnambulance and unconsciousness and semi-automatic kind of zoning along on autopilot, reacting to stressful conditions rather than responding mindfully. reacting mindlessly, and often generating unwitting or witting harm in the process to yourself as well as others. So in the remaining moments of this extended guided meditation, just again, bathing in the silence that's underneath my words and your thoughts. That transcends the room that we're in, which is, of course, as big as the planet Earth. And noticing how easily we can get caught up in thoughts, in the thought stream. And when you notice that your mind is no longer in your body or with your breathing or just resting in the boundless spaciousness of awareness itself, that noticing is also part of the awareness function. So you're already back. And you don't have to blame yourself or criticize yourself or push anything away or pursue anything. It's all at your disposal right in this moment, without becoming imprisoned by our own emotional reactivity and endless thought streams and attachment to those naughty personal pronouns, I, me, and mine, or us and them for that matter. And awareness can liberate us from that, just like when a finger touches a soap bubble, it self-liberates, it just goes poof. That's how vulnerable our attachment to our thoughts and emotions really is. It's like virtually empty of any essential validity. When we tap into the wisdom of your own awareness that, as I've been saying, you don't have to acquire because you were born with this one. Access to it that we need to cultivate, and that's why meditation is a way of being. It's a practice. Every moment has its own validity. Can we let it become our default mode, so to speak, that we default to mindfulness and compassion and kindness, especially when the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan in the world and in our lives. And then let our doing, as I said, come out of this being. Moment by moment by moment. Now, when you're ready, I would invite you to, if your eyes have been closed, as I see many of your eyes have been closed, but you don't need to meditate formally with your eyes closed. But when you care to, mindfully becoming aware of your eyes opening and drinking in whatever is in front of you.